The crystal ballroom of the Hampton Grand shimmered under golden chandeliers, and in the middle of that light, a black maid stood frozen, holding a tray that shook in her hands. "Dance for us, sweetheart," said Chad Hampton, the millionaire host, raising his champagne glass. "If you can make me smile, I'll marry you right here." Laughter burst from the tables. White men in tuxedos, women in diamonds, laughing at the sight of a trembling maid. Keisha Williams, 28, the only black face in that sea of wealth, swallowed hard. Her eyes darted toward the exit, but every door seemed miles away. "Come on," Chad smirked. "Don't be shy. You people love to perform." The orchestra hesitated. The guests leaned forward like predators waiting for the kill. Keisha's breath trembled, but her gaze slowly lifted. Her eyes locked on Chad's. For the first time that night, the laughter started to fade. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now. Because stories like this are still happening and the world needs to hear them. A tray slipped from her hands. Glasses shattered across the marble floor. The sound echoed louder than the music. She bent down silently, picking up each broken piece as whispers spread through the hall. "Careful," said one woman with fake concern. "She might cut herself or steal the glass." Another guest laughed too loudly. "It's fine. They're used to cleaning up our mess anyway." Keisha didn't answer. Her hands trembled, but her face stayed calm. Behind that calm, years of humiliation pressed like iron on her chest. 8 years working invisible shifts in the same hotel. 8 years overhearing drunken jokes about the help. 8 years since her father's name was destroyed by the same man now laughing at her. She looked up again, her eyes sharper now. The chandeliers reflected in them like tiny flames. "Don't stop the music," Chad ordered. "She's got one last dance before we throw her out." For a second, even the violinist froze. No one dared move. And then Keisha spoke, quiet but steady. "Are you sure about that, Mr. Hampton?" Her voice sliced through the laughter like a blade through silk. The crowd went silent. Chad blinked, confused, because in that one sentence, the maid didn't sound like a servant anymore. She sounded like someone who already knew the ending. The silence in the ballroom lingered like smoke. Then the lights dimmed and the band struck a softer note, as if to erase what had just happened. Keisha lowered her head, picked up the last shard of glass, and left through the service door. The moment the kitchen door swung shut behind her, the noise of the party returned. Muffled laughter, clinking glasses, music pretending nothing had happened. Inside the staff corridor, the air smelled of detergent and old wood. Keisha leaned against the wall, eyes closed, breathing slowly. Her hands still trembled, but not from fear, from restraint. A younger maid whispered, "Why do you let them talk to you like that?" Keisha forced a small smile. "Because I'm not done yet." Every night, she finished her shift after midnight, walking the same hallway lined with portraits of Hampton's ancestors, pale faces in gold frames watching her pass. She always looked up at the last one, Jonathan Hampton, founder of the hotel chain. Her father once said, those eyes reminded him of the men who never saw people like them as human. Her father, Samuel Williams, had been the hotel's chief accountant for 15 years. Honest, proud, careful, until one mistake he never made cost him everything. She remembered that night, him sitting at the kitchen table, the termination letter in shaking hands. "They said I stole from them, Keisha," he whispered. "I thought truth mattered." 3 months later, truth still hadn't saved him. A stroke took him in his sleep. That memory never left her. It lived behind her eyes every time she scrubbed the floors of this building. The clock struck 2 a.m. Keisha hung up her apron, opened a small notebook from her locker, and flipped to a page filled with names, dates, and numbers. Bank accounts, transactions, photographs of confidential files she'd taken during late-night cleaning rounds. She traced one line with her finger. "You took everything from him, Chad. Tonight, you almost made me dance. But next time, you'll dance." She closed the notebook, placed it back in the locker, and straightened her uniform. Tomorrow would look the same to everyone else, just another maid starting another shift. Only she knew it was the start of her plan. Morning sunlight spilled through the glass walls of the Hampton Grand lobby, turning every surface gold. Keisha stood quietly near the elevators, polishing brass rails as businessmen in tailored suits brushed past her like she was invisible. From the mezzanine above, Chad Hampton watched with a lazy grin, coffee cup in hand. "There's our little dancer," he murmured to his assistant, still pretending she belongs here. His assistant chuckled nervously. "Should I let security know?" "No, Chaudhry Plaid. She's entertainment now." Keisha didn't look up, but she heard every word, every sneer, every laugh. Hours passed. She moved from floor to floor, cleaning, refilling, organizing. Each motion steady, rehearsed, unbothered. Yet beneath that calm was something sharper, like a storm building behind glass. In the afternoon, she walked past the executive lounge where Chad was hosting a meeting with investors. Through the half-open door, she heard him bragging about profits, about power, about how certain staff were lucky to even have a job. One of the investors asked, "Is that the girl from last night?" Chad laughed. "Yeah, I gave her a moment of fame. They should be grateful for crumbs." The room joined in the laughter. Keisha's hand tightened around the cleaning cart handle. For a moment, she saw her father's face, tired, defeated, holding that letter again. And then she exhaled quietly. Later that evening, she slipped into the accounting office after hours, the same room her father once worked in. The air still smelled of old paper and lemon polish. She opened a file drawer labeled Confidential, Payroll. Inside were folders stamped with signatures she recognized. Fake invoices, missing balances, offshore references. She took photos silently, one by one. Her reflection in the glass door looked different now. Not a maid, not a victim. A woman preparing to end a legacy of lies. A faint sound behind her made her freeze. Chad's voice drifted through the hallway. "Still here, sweetheart? Didn't you dance enough for me?" He was half drunk, jacket unbuttoned, ego glowing under the dim light. Keisha turned slowly. "Just finishing up, sir." "Good girl," he said, stepping closer. "Maybe next time, you'll bring me a smile instead of attitude." She forced a polite nod, then walked away before the rage in her chest could escape. Behind her, his laughter echoed through the corridor, the last careless laugh before everything changed. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. The next night, the grand ballroom glittered again. Another charity event. Another room filled with the same rich faces pretending to care. Keisha moved quietly between the tables, silver tray balanced in steady hands. From the main stage, Chad Hampton lifted his glass, pretending charm. "A toast," he said, "to hard work and loyalty." The crowd laughed. They all knew what loyalty meant in his world. Silence. When his eyes found Keisha, that smirk returned. "Ah, the dancer's here. Still waiting for your encore." The guests chuckled. Some leaned closer, whispering, expecting another humiliation. Keisha placed her tray on a table and stood upright. For a second, the music faltered. Every sound in the ballroom felt distant, like the world was holding its breath. Then she said softly, "Why not, Mr. Hampton?" The words landed like thunder. Chad blinked. "Excuse me. You dare me to dance," she said. "Let's finish what you started." Gasps scattered across the room. The orchestra glanced at each other, confused. "Play," Keisha said quietly, her voice calm but unshakable. The violinist hesitated, then began a slow tango, low, haunting, deliberate. Keisha stepped forward. Her movements were graceful, confident, nothing like the timid maid they'd mocked. She led the rhythm, each step precise, powerful. The crowd stared, speechless. Chad tried to laugh, tried to regain control, but she was already guiding the dance. He stumbled once, twice, sweat glistening under the chandelier. "Relax, sir," she whispered. "You wouldn't want a guest to see you lose control." He gritted his teeth. "Who do you think you are?" Her lips curved slightly. "You'll remember soon." Every turn drew him closer to panic. Every beat reminded him he wasn't leading anymore. The music swelled, dramatic, consuming. As the final note echoed, she stopped, holding his wrist firmly before he could step away. Her voice dropped to a whisper only he could hear. "You ruined Samuel Williams," she said. I'm his daughter. Chad froze. His smile shattered. Around them, the applause began, confused, polite, unaware that the real show had just begun. The applause faded into uneasy murmurs. Chad's grin struggled to return, but his hands trembled. "What did you say?" he hissed through clenched teeth. Keisha didn't blink. "You heard me." She let go of his wrist and turned toward the orchestra. "Stop the music." The violinist froze mid-note. The crowd looked around, confused. "Ladies and gentlemen," Keisha said, her voice steady but sharp, "your host enjoys games. Tonight, I'd like to show you one he's been playing for 8 years. A ripple ran through the guests, whispers, nervous laughter. Security, Chad snapped, but no one moved. The 2 guards near the door exchanged uncertain glances. Keisha walked to the nearest table and picked up her small black purse. From inside, she pulled out a sleek tablet and a portable speaker. "I've worked here since my father died," she said. "He was accused of stealing from this company, but the thief is standing right here." Chad laughed, voice high and desperate. "This is nonsense. She's insane." Keisha pressed play. A recording filled the ballroom. Chad's voice, crystal clear. "Who's going to suspect we embezzled money from the staff fund? They don't even read the contracts." The audience gasped. Glasses clinked. Someone whispered, "Is that really him?" Keisha turned the volume higher. "Just make sure the paper trail points to the accountant." "What was his name?" "Williams. He'll take the fall." Chad's face went pale. "That's fake," he shouted. "Edited." A voice from the upper balcony cut him off. "Actually," said David Williams, stepping into view, "it's admissible evidence under New York law." The room erupted. Reporters stood, flashing cameras. "David," Chad stammered. You're her uncle," David said calmly, showing his federal badge. "FBI Financial Crimes Division." Keisha met Chad's eyes one last time. "You made me invisible, remember? That's how I watched everything." Across the room, another figure appeared, Jennifer Cole, an investigative journalist posing as a waitress. She raised her mic. "Mr. Hampton, would you like to comment on these allegations for the New York Herald?" Flashes exploded as guests backed away. Chad stumbled, shouting at no one, his empire crumbling in real time. Keisha stood still in the center of it all, silent, composed, unbroken. The woman they mocked was now holding the entire room in her hands. Federal agents moved through the ballroom like a tide. Guests whispered, some filming on their phones, others slipping away before cameras found their faces. Chad Hampton stood frozen under the chandelier that had once lit his victories. Now it burned like a spotlight of judgment. "Chad Hampton," David said, stepping forward with calm authority, "you are under arrest for tax evasion, employee exploitation, racial discrimination, and corporate fraud." He recited the charges one by one, every word striking harder than the last. Chad's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His face was pale, his eyes wild. "This is a mistake," he stammered. "I can fix it. I'll pay whatever you want." Keisha didn't move. Her expression stayed calm, unreadable. "You can't pay back dignity," she said quietly, "or a man's life." David gestured, and 2 agents stepped forward. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the marble hall. Cameras flashed again. The crowd that once laughed now stared in silence, ashamed, curious, afraid. As Chad was led toward the exit, he looked back at her, eyes pleading. "You set me up," he yelled. "No, que ça déplaise softly. You set yourself up. I just made sure the world saw it." Outside, red and blue lights painted the Grand Hotel in color, sirens wailing against the night. The same guests who had mocked her now whispered her name like it carried weight. "That's the maid." "No, that's the woman who took down Hampton." Jennifer, the journalist, approached with tears in her eyes. "You did it, Keisha. You really did it." Keisha shook her head. "We did it. My father would have wanted truth, not revenge." She stepped out onto the front steps. The cold air hit her face, carrying the sound of distant sirens and murmuring reporters. For the first time in 8 years, she could breathe. Behind her, the ballroom doors closed, sealing away the ghosts of every insult she'd endured. David joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You ready to go home?" Keisha looked at the flashing lights reflecting off the glass towers. "Home isn't a place anymore," she said. "It's what I rebuild from here." The night felt endless, but for Keisha, it wasn't darkness anymore. It was light finally breaking through the cracks. 6 months later, the name Keisha Williams was no longer whispered in hotel hallways. It was printed on headlines, spoken in classrooms, and displayed on talk shows across America. The front of the New York Herald read, "From Maid to Millionaire, the black woman who exposed a corporate empire." Inside her new office on the 45th floor overlooking Central Park, Keisha stood beside a framed photo of her father, Samuel Williams. The brass plaque on the door read, "The Samuel Williams Foundation." She had turned her pain into purpose, a foundation offering scholarships for children of exploited workers. Behind her desk, stacks of applications waited. Each one carried a story like hers. A gentle knock came on the door. It was Jennifer Cole, the journalist who broke the story. "You're trending again," she said with a smile. CNN, "Good morning, America. Everyone wants your interview." Keisha laughed softly. "I'll do one, but this time it's not about me. It's about them." She pointed to a wall covered with portraits, students, factory workers, hotel staff, all smiling. They're the real story. Later that evening, Keisha stood on a stage at a university auditorium. The crowd applauded as she took the mic. Cameras flashed, but her eyes stayed calm. "When I started," she said, "I was invisible. People looked through me like I didn't exist. But every time they ignored me, I learned how power really hides, not in money, but in silence." The room was silent now, listening. "My father taught me to fight with truth. It took years, but we proved that truth still matters." Somewhere far away, in a small prison cell, Chad Hampton watched the same speech on a flickering TV. His empire was gone, his name erased from the skyline he once owned. The woman he mocked for being ordinary had become extraordinary. As the audience rose for a standing ovation, Keisha looked up toward the ceiling lights and whispered, "We did it, Dad." When the applause quieted, she stepped back to the microphone one last time. Her voice was gentle but powerful, the same tone that once silenced the ballroom. "If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it."